Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dials, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. All small business owners, at least the ones we know and have worked with, are continually focused on sales and increasing revenue. And rightfully so, if they have a desire to get value out of the business eventually with a transaction. As you've heard us say many times, if you've listened to us at all in the past, you've heard us say something along the lines of nothing is more important than financial performance when selling your business to a third party. But that's also important. It's also as important if you decide to sell to insiders or to an ESOP, because you're going to need cash flow to be successful in executing any of those exit routes. Doesn't matter if it's third party sale, transfer to insiders, or an ESOP. You're going to need cash flow to be successful. And that begins, of course, with selling something, with sales and revenue. And with that said, we also find in working with business owners that it can be challenging. It's an ongoing challenge a lot of times to have a disciplined approach to sales and sales forecasting. Accountability is another thing that could be tough. But forecasting, and so that's today's topic. We're going to talk about a beginner's guide to sales forecasting. And we have with us repeat guests, Chris Tully of Sales Growth Advisors. Chris is founder and president of Sales Growth Advisors. He and his team provide clients with a comprehensive sales strategy, integrated sales process, and an effective sales plan or execution plan. His personal focus as a fractional VP of sales for many of his clients is to help businesses realize breakthrough sales growth, discipline, and accountability, things I just mentioned a few minutes ago. And Chris has been involved with this, with sales on some level for many, many years. And so hence we're having him back with us again as our resident expert on sales and sales management and sales forecasting and everything else. So Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. It's great to be back with you guys. And Walter, nice to see you again. And really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Hey, Chris, let me start us off. So, most of the clients Pat and I work with are somewhere between 5 and 20 million in revenue. We do have some that are, between 1 million and 5 million. And I guess it surprised me at first now that clients didn't do a good job of forecasting sales and business projections. Now I would say I'm much more surprised when I say to somebody, do you have a sales forecast? And they can actually pull one out. Yeah. What's your experience working with clients of that size range?
I think that it starts a little bit with Walter, with kind of where they came from, right? So a lot of times businesses that are under 5 million have set for themselves, we're going to get to 5 million. That's our next best goal, right? And they get there sort of any way that they can get there. And oftentimes, as you guys know, oftentimes the principals in the company are the rainmakers. There may be 1 or 2 people that founded the company, particularly true in government contracting, right? Where they found their way to a set of opportunities and they got some revenue and they got some clients, and the next thing they know, they got a company and it's starting to grow a little bit. But oftentimes they don't really step back and look at whether the foundation is solid for the business to actually be able to scale, right? And so I think when we were together the last time, we talked about, from the standpoint of specifically sales, the single best thing that a business owner can do to ensure that their business is viable is to work themselves out of the sales role, right? And it's hard to do that if it's what you're good at and what you like to do, right? And if you haven't spent any time working out what the processes should be. So it's really critical that they get their business to be self-sustaining so it can run without them, right? Well, oftentimes, forecasting is just one more piece of sales process. And businesses have a lot of difficulty forecasting sales and revenue for a lot of reasons. They don't have good pipeline discipline. They maybe don't have a process established to inspect what's in the pipeline to see that it's a solid, credible prospect. Oftentimes the CRM system they're using, or maybe they don't have a CRM system, but oftentimes the CRM system that they're using doesn't give them enough insight into what's actually happening in each of their opportunities. And more often than not, sales teams do a pretty poor job qualifying opportunities. So reps chase things that really aren't going to close. All of that sort of comes together around forecasting, which is essentially just the ability to predict what revenue you're going to get and when you're going to get it and where it's going to come from and who's going to close it. So if that foundation hasn't been laid properly, it can be very difficult to say, yes, we're going to get this much revenue in this quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is another piece of it, because I know, Corby does a great job at this piece, which I sometimes don't always think of, but as you hit certain milestones, certain expense categories are going to have to change too. The classic where it's like, we're going to grow revenue 10% a year for the next 30 years. But when they're looking at a budget, they're not increasing people, space, or anything else. So you have to be aware of the fact that when you reach certain points, the whole dynamics of the company could change, right?
Yeah, I mean, forecasting is very much a sort of forward-looking indicator, right? It looks back at what you've done and it looks forward at what you're capable of doing. If you don't understand where your revenue is coming from by line of business or by geography or by customer segment, whichever is the right way that you're looking at that in your business. If you don't know where your business is coming from and when to expect it, it's very difficult to take corrective action when things start to go in a different direction. So you need a solid forecasting process in place in order to plan staffing, to plan marketing expense, to plan sales activity like sales events or customer events. You needed to be able to budget for marketing expenditures. You needed to be able to tell whether or not you have the wherewithal to upgrade your technology infrastructure. You need to understand where that revenue is going to come from well enough in advance to have a forward-looking budget that you can predict with reliability out 2 or 3 quarters. In order to do that, you have to have the right sales pipeline. In order to do that, you have to have a whole lot of things in place. So it enables your ability to predict the future a little bit with both respect to revenue and also to expenses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chris, a beginner's guide to sales forecasting.
Mm-hmm.
All of what you just said, of course, makes complete sense. If we have listeners today who would agree that everything you just said makes complete sense, they understand it and get it. In regard to a beginner's guide to sales forecasting, are there like 3 steps or 5 steps you could give listeners today in regard to a beginner's guide? They're just getting started, or they're going to revamp their whole process. What are 3 steps, or how many ever steps you would give them in order to get started?
Yeah, I think the first one is to ensure that the sales process that you're expecting your team to follow is built properly, meaning you need to understand each stage of your sales process. You need to understand what happens in each one of those stages, and you need to understand what the hurdles are in each stage that you need to clear before you have the ability to move further into the next step of the sales cycle. So getting your sales process built properly, I think, is number one. I think number two is ensuring that you've got, call it CRM integrity, right? That the sales process that you built is properly reflected in your CRM system, and that you have the right level of and quality of reports and dashboards to support using that CRM as a decision tool for the leadership team, right? So the sales process is the first thing. The second thing is getting it integrated with a CRM solution that gives you visibility into what's happening on a regular basis. And I think the third is actually understanding, sort of at a macro level, what your funnel needs to look like. Some people call this sales math or performance metrics or something like that, but you need to know how many leads coming in the door do you need in order to get to a certain number of qualified opportunities. And then from those qualified opportunities, you need to know how many proposals, as an example, you're going to generate. And then you need to understand what the conversion rate of those proposals is into actual opportunity. And so understanding sort of the third piece would be funnel dynamics. Understanding all of that will give you a sense for whether you have enough opportunities in play to actually achieve your growth plan, whatever that plan is. And obviously, every business is going to have a different set of metrics associated with it and a different pipeline dynamic. So not everybody's metrics are going to be the same, but you need to customize that for your business in conjunction with the first two things.
Yeah. And so would that process look any different for, Walter mentioned earlier that most of our clients are at this point between 5 and 20 million, but not a few, or between 1 and 5. Would the process look any different for the 1 and 5 folks than the 5 and 20 folks?
Honestly, I don't think it really does. I think getting the process. So what I basically said, those three things were sales process fundamentals, CRM integrity, and the third one was kind of funnel dynamics, right? If you don't have each of those three elements tuned properly for your business, whatever size it is, if it's a $2 million business or a $15 million business, it's going to be almost impossible for you to predict with any reliability when your revenue is going to come, right? The more opportunities that fill up your pipeline, you can have a pipeline with tons of opportunity in them, but if they're not good opportunities, you're not going to close them, right? So my take on this is that fundamentals in this really, really matter. Sales is not a magic thing. It's a process, and the process holds at 2 or 3 or 4 million, and it also holds at 15 or 20 million. Now, there's a lot of things that are different, clearly, right? You may have larger companies often have segmented themselves in ways that are different than smaller companies. They may have a product revenue stream, and they may have a services revenue stream, or they may have a direct sales force, and they may have sales that come to them through channels or agents, right? Or they may have a bunch of revenue that's recurring, and then revenue that is one-time revenue. So each of those obviously gets treated a little bit differently, but the fundamentals really hold for each component. Right. And so you need the same discipline at 3 million to do that sort of work as you do if you're 13 or 14 or 15.
Got it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess, I'd like to just hear your take on this, but, once you're a certain size, you're going to have internal staff,
right,
that can take care of a lot of this.
Yep.
When you're you got the business that's 1 to 3 million in revenue, and pretty much the owner's doing everything.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing that they would love to do, but they never do.
Right.
And that's where I've seen, one of the values of Pat and Corby is that this is something that can be outsourced really well.
Yeah.
And I think that business owners need to be aware of that because it is so important that it has to be done and you can't sacrifice it because you don't have the time to do it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, despite my own interest in, outsourced sales leadership opportunities, I look around at what small businesses need. And for the most part, almost all the things that would enable them to kind of punch above their weight can be outsourced to somebody that has depth of understanding and experience in those areas and built for them so that they don't have to spend their precious time doing it. So I'm very familiar with fractional chief financial officers and fractional chief human capital officers and fractional chief information security officers and fractional COOs. Every one of those opportunity or people, right, represent an opportunity to bring talent into your organization and enable you to act like you're bigger than you really are and get fundamentals in place put there by somebody that's done it many times over again. And I think a lot of times, many entrepreneurs, certainly in this area, at least in Northern Virginia, many of them are technologists at heart, right? They built a business because they have they developed a thing, a widget that they manufacture, and they found a customer for it. And they started to sell it, or they're software engineers, or they're government program specialists, right? And so they know their area very, very well. And I guess I would argue, Walter, they shouldn't spend their time learning something else that somebody else has spent a lifetime doing, right? Yeah. And could come in and help them with.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
But Chris, they're going to need, even if they outsource, they can outsource the strategic planning and the forecasting and get someone like you in as a fractional sales strategist and manager. But they still need internal salespeople as well, right? I mean, and that's to actually do sales. The fractional folks like you guys don't do the sales for the business owner, but you can help manage the salespeople.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. I mean, it also depends on how you choose to cut that, right? So there are services companies out there that will manage the outreach strategy for a given client. So they'll make outbound phone calls on behalf of a client. They'll manage an outbound email cadence on behalf of a client, right? So the client investment is, finding somebody to do something that's very difficult to do internally and manage it in any sort of small scale, and use that lever to bring a lead into the company that a subject matter expert in the company can actually do something with. So it's not uncommon to see that where a team may have superb engineering resources that can solve very difficult problems. Those aren't really salespeople, but if the lead came to them somehow, then they could take it and they could develop it and they could ultimately monetize it. That's a pretty good model for a smaller company getting started. And it's also, so the question of how many salespeople do you need and what kind should you have and all of that depends quite a lot on what, certainly depends on what the investment case is for the company, right? How much can they afford to actually do themselves internally? But it also depends on what's the growth strategy, right? I would argue for a company in that sort of $1 to $3 million range, at the low end of that, the principal's probably going to drive most of the revenue. When the opportunity outruns the principal's ability to get revenue themselves, they should think about selectively adding external resources to help them drive leads, so that somebody in the company can then monetize those leads.
Yeah. So your firm, Sales Growth Advisors, do you guys provide that piece, that lead generation piece?
I have worked over, I've been at this, Pat, since basically the beginning of 2014. And I've done I've worked with a number of external service providers who provide those sorts of services to clients. I don't do that myself. I'd rather find somebody that's really good at managing that process and then partner with them to help my client. Right. So there are, plenty of firms out there that have developed real expertise in that account-based marketing area, outbound telephonics, email sales cadences to drive leads. I learned a long time ago that you're better off working with an expert in something to help your client rather than trying to do it yourself. So no, I don't do that.
In a few minutes when we close up, we're going to ask you for to give your contact information.
Oh, sure.
But if someone's listening and is interested in that piece as well, could they contact you and could you help facilitate some introductions for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk to anybody that's got a sales or revenue problem. If I can help them, it's an honor to be able to do that. If I can't help them, but there's somebody better that maybe has a more specialized service offering that could be helpful to them, I'm absolutely going to connect them and see if I can facilitate that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you. So you start the year with your sales forecast. How often are you matching that against actuals? And in what circumstances do you totally revise the forecast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally think that the leadership team should be looking at the revenue pipeline at least weekly, not necessarily revamping a forecast every week, but every week you should be sitting down with your sales leader or your sales people if they work for you directly, and looking at the size of the pipeline, the stability and quality of the pipeline and what's been happening in it and whether the expectations that you had are actually being realized. I would look to sort of a formal financial forecast where the CEO and the CFO and the head of sales are sitting down together, probably monthly. And you're looking at what did we do last month? What do we expect to do this month? And what does that do for us in the current quarter? And what does it foretell for us in the out quarters? Particularly if you have a longer sales cycle business, you're going to want to know in Q1 where your Q3 and Q4 opportunities are going to be. In terms of reworking the entire thing, I'm not sure there's a specific time to it, but if you find that you're missing your forecasts a couple of months in a row, you may want to pull back and look pretty closely at what's going on, because it's possible that some of the assumptions that you made at the beginning of the process have started to come apart. And if that's the case, then you want the opportunity to kind of, circle back together and rethink the assumptions that you made as part of your financial forecast.
Yeah. So if an owner's out there listening and they're thinking, okay, all this makes sense. And I've been thinking about hiring internally. I want to make my first sales professional hire, because I do see, because Ennis Legacy Partners and Walter Dial have told me, for my business to increase in value, I need to more and more remove myself
right
as the rainmaker and central to the business and so on and so forth. And as you said earlier, Chris, a lot of these owners are the chief rainmaker, and they know they need to pull back from that. So they're going to make that first hire. Mm-hmm. How should they think about that first hire? And then we'll let you go. Thanks so much for the time you've given us.
Yeah, of course.
We appreciate it. But if you can answer that question, how they should think about that first hire, and then also any last words of wisdom that you might have for listeners today.
I think in terms of the first sales hire, I might look first inside the company and see if there might be, I've seen a lot of clients that have had remarkable success taking subject matter expert or sales engineering type person, and having them convert their activity just a little bit to be more sales oriented, and then supporting them with the right tools and resources to help them succeed. So the first question I would ask is, do you have somebody internally that actually wants this role, gets the job, right? Has the capacity to do the work, and then and wants to be in that sort of a role? That would be probably my first stop. The second one, if that person doesn't exist, the second thing I would want to do is make sure that I was very clear about the roles, responsibilities, performance metrics, and compensation or incentive strategy for that person. How am I going to, what is that person supposed to do, and how am I going to ensure that they succeed, and how am I going to pay them? And then I probably would go find some sort of help on the recruiter side. There are a lot of ways to post jobs, LinkedIn, Indeed. Nothing wrong with doing that, but oftentimes the person that you really want in the role is already employed somewhere else, performing at a high level for somebody different.
Looking for a job, maybe.
Yeah, right. I'd think very seriously about spending a little extra money and hiring a good recruiter.
Okay, that's fantastic. Any last words of wisdom today? Of course, we're going to have you back in the future, but for this episode,
honestly, I wouldn't say they're words of wisdom. I spend my days working with business owners who have sales issues and an aspiration to have their company grow faster. And I've learned that it's exceptionally important that the foundation for growth be laid properly. And it takes a little time to get it right, but once it's done, it gives you a repeatable sales model that can lead to reliable revenue growth and improved profitability. So I guess my words of wisdom would be, let's get the foundation right together first, and then you can grow.
Fantastic. That's great advice. It's good to end on that today. Hey, Chris, share your contact information, and then too, if there's anything that you'd like to promote today, if you've written a new book or you got some kind of product or promotion, whatever, anything you want to promote, and share your contact info. Yeah,
so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's easy to do. You can email me at ctully@salesacceleration.com. You can call me at 571-329-4343. I'm happy to talk to anybody that needs any help trying to get their business to grow faster or to grow better. It's been a pleasure being with you guys.
It's always a pleasure, and certainly we'll have you back in the new year, Chris. Thanks so much. Listeners, if you want help building transferable business value or planning for your exit in any way, you can reach out at grfcpa.com through that website, or exitreadiness.com. And also, if you set up a free account at exitreadiness.com, you'll receive a 10% discount on anything that you purchase there if you use the code podcast, all caps. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dials signing off.